Week 13 of the NFL season is officially in the books, and the theme of the 2025 season was displayed all throughout Week 13 as nobody knows anything, and anything can happen on any given Sunday. The Bengals beat the Ravens by 18 points on Thanksgiving night, the Bears ran for over 275 yards as a team on Black Friday against the Eagles, and the Panthers stunned everyone with a 31-28 win over the Rams on Sunday, in a game where Bryce Young threw 3 touchdown passes, and in a game where Matt Stafford threw 2 interceptions. And in today's video, we're going to break down the biggest winners and losers from Week 13. And there was a lot that took place this week, and if you could like the video before we start, a football will appear when you do, and it would also be very much appreciated and help tremendously with the almighty YouTube algorithm. And with that preface out of the way, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers beat the Rams in Week 13 with a score of 31-28 and improved to 7-6 as they enter their Week 14 bye. And they're in today's video for a few reasons. The obvious reason, of course, is they won, but that's not the only reason as to why they're in today's video. A week ago right now, they were 6-6 and coming off of a 20-9 loss in San Francisco that, if we are being completely honest, they had every chance to win. And heading into the Week 13 game against the Rams, I didn't think there was a chance the Panthers would win this game. As simple as this sounds, you also have to remember there's a human element to this, and by the time the Panthers flew out of San Francisco on Monday night, it was probably midnight to 1 a.m. Eastern time, and then the actual flight is 5 to 6 hours across the country, and my point is, you're looking at the Panthers team probably getting to their actual homes around 7 or 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning, already on a short week, facing a team that looked absolutely dominant in Week 12 against Tampa on Sunday night. And then, of course, there's the Bryce Young roller coaster part of this, where he threw for a franchise record 448 yards in Week 11 against Atlanta, then followed it up with a 2-interception performance in primetime the very next week. And against a Chris Shula defense already on a short week, forget it. There was a reason they were double-digit underdogs entering this game. But they won, and Bryce Young had 2 phenomenal touchdown passes in this game, one to Tetairoa McMillan and the other to Jalen Coker, and he technically threw a 3rd touchdown pass to Chuba Hubbard, but that wasn't a hard throw like the other 2 were, if you get what I'm saying. No disrespect, of course, it's just the other 2 were big-time NFL throws compared to a route out of the backfield. And also within this game, the Panthers were able to intercept a red-hot Matt Stafford twice, including a pick 6 from Mike Jackson, and another that occurred in the red zone. They also played big boy grown man football in this game, as the Rams had 3 total offensive plays in the 3rd quarter, and the best way to keep the Rams from scoring is to keep an MVP candidate in Matt Stafford off the field. And they're also in today's video because the Bucs did not look good in Week 13, and given that the Panthers play the Bucs twice in their final 4 games, well, guys, the NFC South is right in front of them, and this was a huge win for the Panthers. The Bengals are also big winners from Week 13, and we haven't included the Bengals in many weekly winners in 2025, but they absolutely deserve it for Week 13. They're 4-8 in the year, and they're certainly not your typical 4-8 team. The Ravens and Steelers, which we will discuss later in the video, are both 6-6 and have their own problems. And the Bengals just got Joe Burrow back, and if they can beat the Bills next week and get a little help down the stretch of the 2025 regular season, well, a 9-8 finish is not unreasonable for them, especially given their final 3 games are at the Dolphins, home against the Cardinals, and home against the Browns. And one of the biggest reasons the Bengals are in today's video is because of what Week 13 represents for them, and that's a gateway to potentially winning the AFC North. Had they fallen to 3-9 with 3 games to make up in the division, I'd say no shot. But they forced 5 turnovers defensively, and Jamar Chase had over 100 yards in Joe Burrow's return, and they won by 18 points on the road in Baltimore. And there's a lot of happy people in the Queen City enjoying a nice bowl of Skyline chili this week after a big Bengals win. The Detroit Lions are up, and they're in today's video for, unfortunately, all the wrong reasons. Now, over the past couple of years, we've done several videos on why this team has been an exemplary team and a model team in terms of how to build an NFL franchise, and it really started by trading Matt Stafford and acquiring all the first-round picks, and then selecting Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the first draft, and then Aiden Hutchinson and J-Mo and Kirby and everybody else in the ensuing drafts, and you get the point. But they're in today's video because they are 7-5, and they have a very very difficult stretch in front of them, and when you look at the biggest winners and losers from Week 13, well, they not only lost to a division rival in the Green Bay Packers, but they were swept by the Green Bay Packers, as they also lost to them back in Week 1 with a score of 27-13. And entering the 2025 regular season, I really thought that it should have been hammered home more by the national media that, hey, the Detroit Lions are probably going to regress to some degree, as it shouldn't be expected to have 15 wins and to have a top 15 NFL offense of all time in points per game every single year. Now, I think there have been some mentions of this recently about, hey, Ben Johnson won the breakup, and they want to make it be a Ben Johnson versus Dan Campbell thing, and I don't think that's exactly fair, because the 2024 Lions recipe for success was a perfect combination of everything. A lot of players were peaking at the right time, including several players along the offensive line, and the Lions have also been very banged up along the offensive line this year, and honestly, a good summarization of the 2025 Lions season was the announcement of Frank Ragnow coming back and then announcing the very next day that he has a grade 3 hamstring strain. And if you know anything about hamstring strains, well, that's an extremely severe hamstring strain, and needless to say, Frank Ragnow is unfortunately not coming back. And again, I think that's a good summarization of this year for the Lions. But why they're also in today's video is when you look across the rest of the NFC, specifically with the two big teams in their division and the current number 1 seed Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, who of course swept the Lions, which has a lot of implications for playoff seedings, and then you also look at the NFC West, which currently has 3 9-win teams. Well, there's a very real scenario where the Lions finish their final 5 games with a 2-3, or maybe even finish with a 3-2 record and get to 10 wins, but guess what? It's not quite enough, because the NFC West has 3 11-win teams, and the Bears and Packers each finish the year with 11 wins, or maybe the Packers lose a couple of games and finish with 10 wins, but because of the tie and ultimately the 2 wins they have over the Lions, they get the tiebreaker over the Lions to get to the postseason. And I'll be honest, I don't think that happens, but it's just a scenario where, look, the Lions are not in their driver's seat in terms of getting into the postseason, and we are looking at a scenario right now where the Detroit Lions missed the playoffs in 2025, and ultimately that plays a significant part as to why they're in a Week 13 biggest winners and losers video. The Kansas City Chiefs are in today's video for very similar reasons to the Detroit Lions, and when you look across the AFC right now, there are 6 teams with 8+ wins, and pretty quickly you can do the math that the Chiefs need a lot of help just to get into the postseason, and even if they win out, which by the way, they have a playoff schedule before the playoffs even start, even then it's not guaranteed that they get into the postseason. And I'll be honest, the last thing I would bet on right now is the Chiefs winning out based on how they've played for really most, if not all, of the 2025 regular season. And there's a lot of frustration within the 2025 Chiefs. I would argue the run game has been extremely frustrating all year. The pass rush has also been very frustrating, and there was a point earlier in the year where George Karlaftis, after signing a big contract extension, was leading the NFL in pressures, but that wasn't a true leading the NFL in pressures, if you understand what I'm saying. It was a lot of Chris Jones is going to force the quarterback out to George Karlaftis' side, and basically what George Karlaftis is going to do is he's going to get near the quarterback or run towards the quarterback, and then the quarterback can either throw it to the flat or throw it away, and that is, in theory, a pressure from George Karlaftis, despite him being the direct beneficiary of Chris Jones' hard work. And within this, the Chiefs have next to zero pass rush outside of Chris Jones, and George Karlaftis' production, again, a lot of it has been manufactured, and this is simply not a great football team right now. And when you look at the Chiefs' final 5 games, well, they play the Texans in Week 14, and what we know about the Texans' pass rush against the Chiefs' offensive line, I'm going to be honest, I don't particularly like this matchup against the Chiefs. Then they play the Chargers, at the Titans, home against the Broncos, and at the Raiders. If there is anything positive to say about this in the Chiefs' final 5 games, it's that they play the more difficult games all at Arrowhead Stadium, and that's obviously a benefit for the Chiefs, but I still don't have any confidence in this team at this point in time that they are going to be able to get to the postseason based on how they've been playing over the past couple of weeks. Now, if the Chiefs somehow find their way into the postseason, I think it would be dumb to bet against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and they've won 3 Super Bowls in the past 7 years, and their reputation precedes themselves for a reason, but I'm going to be honest, right now, through 13 weeks, if I had to pick whether or not they get into the postseason, I would say no, simply because there are 6 8+ win teams in the conference, and they're not going to win the AFC West, and I don't think they're going to be able to win enough games to be able to secure a wild card spot. Next up is the Bears for several reasons. Through 13 weeks, the Chicago Bears are the number 1 seed in the NFC, and look, we may disagree on several things, but I think we can all agree that nobody saw this coming, especially after this team started out 0-2 with a 31-point loss to the Lions in Week 2. But they're 9-1 in their last 10 games, and not only have they won multiple games this year that they undoubtedly lose last year, but they went into the Link on Black Friday and beat the Eagles 24-15 in a game where they played big boy grown man football. The Bears became the first team since 2014 to have 2 players rush for at least 125 yards and a touchdown in a single game, and I know GM Ryan Poles has had a lot of criticism since taking over the Bears job, most notably the fact he's drafted over 30 players without drafting a single Pro Bowler, a stat that I think changes soon, but the way the Bears addressed the offensive line this past offseason was an absolute masterclass, and we're seeing that every week. Caleb Williams was sacked a staggering 68 times in his rookie year, and in 2025, he's been sacked just 19 times in 12 games. Obviously, some of that can be attributed to him knowing what he can and can't get away with in year 2, but a lot of it also goes back to the offensive line. And not only are the Bears big winners from Week 13 because they beat the Eagles in what is clearly their best win of the year so far, but they're in a rare situation where they're getting healthier as the season goes on. And there's times on the channel where we talk about setting the tone and taking another team's will, but for a lot of this game, the Bears were only up 1 score, yet because of how they were running the football and playing defense, well, there were times where it felt like a morgue inside Lincoln Financial Field, and Eagles fans know that. And now that the Bears are 9-3, the biggest game of the year for them is in Week 14 when they play at Green Bay against their arch-rival Packers. And I can't wait to see how that plays out. And because the Bears took care of business against the Eagles, and also because the Cowboys won too, they are also big winners from Week 13. The Cowboys beat the Chiefs 31-28 in a game where Dak Prescott threw for 320 yards and 2 touchdowns, and in a game where CeeDee Lamb had over 110 receiving yards, and George Pickens also had 88 yards too. And why Dallas is in today's video is not just because they beat the Chiefs, but we all see what's happening in Philadelphia at the moment, and the rest of the Eagles' schedule is not a cakewalk. They play the Chargers in LA in Week 14, and also have to go on the road to Buffalo in Week 17. And with how the Cowboys are playing at the moment, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this team can run the table. At Detroit for Dallas in Week 14 will obviously be a tough game, but they should smoke the Vikings in Week 15, which would set them up with a Week 16 game against the Chargers. And right now with the Cowboys' defensive line playing the way they are, along with the offense, which has been one of the best units in the entire NFL this year, well, if you know anything about the NFC East, then you know there hasn't been a repeat division winner in over 20 years. And with where the top 2 teams in the NFC East are at the moment, well, one is trending in the right direction and one is clearly trending in the wrong direction. The Cowboys are 3-0 since their Week 10 bye and have defeated both of the teams that were in the Super Bowl last year now in back-to-back weeks, and there is a non-zero chance this team enters the postseason having won 8 straight games. The Philadelphia Eagles are in today's video for a couple of reasons, and it's not just because they lost to the Bears in Week 13. Now, at the time of this video release, they are 8-4 and the Dallas Cowboys are 6-5-1, and I'll be honest, there is a non-zero chance the Cowboys come from behind and swipe the NFC East away from the Eagles and win the NFC East, and that would prevent a back-to-back NFC East winner, as the last time the NFC East had a back-to-back winner was the Birds back in 2003 and 2004. They had actually won 4 straight division titles, but you get the point. At the time of this video release, the Eagles have just 15 points in their last 6 quarters played, and with the amount of talent they have on the offense, that is obviously unacceptable, and the fans have been shouting to fire Kevin Patullo for honestly months at this point, as it really started all the way back in weeks 2 or 3 when the struggles were there coming off of the Super Bowl win, and Birds fans obviously want the best from their team, and at the beginning of the year it was a justification of, hey, look, we were 2-2 through 4 games last year before we really got going, and unfortunately in 2025, well, they simply never got going the way the 2024 Eagles did. Whether it's A.J. Brown, who has voiced his concerns not just once or twice, but really several times throughout the 2025 season, or the regression of Saquon Barkley, which I do think should have been expected to some degree, and like we mentioned with the Lions, I don't think it was ever realistic for Saquon to rush for 2,000 yards again, but to regress to the player he has, I'm going to be honest, I don't think that's because Saquon is not the same player physically. I think that part would fall on coaching, and sure, there's probably some holes that Saquon hasn't hit this year that he did last year, but to think that Saquon Barkley is going to completely fall off a cliff production-rise from 24 to 25, well, some of that has to go back on coaching, and obviously some of it does whenever you have opposing players calling out the specific plays. There was a notable mic'd up clip at the end of the Packers game where they were calling out inside zone before the ball was snapped, and obviously that's a very big red flag, and obviously that goes back in the offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo. Then you look at this from a bigger perspective and say, hey, Nick Sirianni is a Super Bowl winning head coach. Should he step into this and basically say, hey, Kevin, the results are lacking for the talent we have. We have just one 400-yard game all year, and we play at the Chargers and at the Bills in 2 of our final 5 games, which are going to be tough games. Should he step in and then take some part into this to alleviate some of the load off of Kevin Patullo to help manufacture more yardage and points from the offense? These are all valid questions for the Eagles as we enter the final 5 games of the 2025 regular season. And the one thing that I would argue right now that I know Birds fans definitely do not want to hear at this specific point in time, but the reality of the NFC and the NFL for the 2025 season is it is extremely wide open. So despite the fact that the Birds have really limped to an 8-4 record, if they make a couple of changes, I mean, the path for not just them, but for anybody is wide open if we are being completely honest. Now, another big loser from week 13 is unfortunately the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Bills went into Acrisure Field in week 13 and absolutely ran all over the Steelers, and there was a clip from TJ Watt that said, I have never seen a team continuously run a play over and over again and have the continued success that they did, and that obviously goes back not only on coaching, but the execution from the players as well, because if you are a Steelers fan, then you have heard this several times throughout the 2025 regular season, that this is the highest paid defense in all of football. This is also a team that started out 4-1 and is now 6-6, and the streak of Mike Tomlin never having a losing season, well, I'm going to be honest, I think it's in jeopardy. The way the Steelers have won games in 2025 is honestly pretty similar to the way that they won games in 2024 and 2023 and 2022, and you get the point, where it's predicated largely off of capitalizing on other teams' mistakes without really ever taking it to a team the way that you'd like to see your team be able to do once or twice a year and be able to have these long 10 or 11 or 12 play drives. Instead, it's games where the Steelers force 4, 5, or 6 turnovers against a Browns team led by Dylan Gabriel, in which they win 23-9 coming off of their Week 5 bye. A win is a win, but whenever the Steelers play the biggest and best teams in the conference, well, a lot of the time, unfortunately, you see how it goes. Now, the Baltimore Ravens are also in today's video for a couple of reasons. The Ravens have had a pretty unfortunate 2025 season, all things considered, and I do think that there is some part to Lamar Jackson not being fully healthy, and I think that shows up week in and week out. But with the Baltimore Ravens, the biggest question that I would ask for this team is, when is the last time this team had a good game? Was it all the way back in week 1 against the Bills on Sunday night? And that was also a game that the Ravens lost with a score of 41-40 due to a couple of unfortunate incidents or events that played out at the end of that game. But after that, and really the week 3 game against the Lions, in which they were still beat pretty handedly, as that was also one of the best games the Lions played all year, the Ravens have not had many, if any, good games offensively since. And like we mentioned during their big 5-game win streak to improve from 1-5 to 6-5, what they were doing in those games was taking advantage of other teams' mistakes. There was no point during that stretch where I definitively said, hey, Lamar Jackson is back, MVP Action Jackson is back, he looks to be back on, and it was really unfortunate for Ravens fans to get all excited and then to lose by 18 points at home on Thanksgiving to Joe Burrow and the Bengals, while also knowing the opportunity to capitalize was there and that the Steelers would have a difficult game in front of them against the Bills, and to take the lead in the AFC North entering Week 14 was there, yet they failed to do so, and not only did they fail to do so, but they also allowed the Bengals to get right back into the division race. The Colts also have a brutal schedule ahead of them, and they've now dropped 3 of their last 4 games, and it's been due in large part to teams bottling up Jonathan Taylor and forcing Daniel Jones to beat them. Now, I know Daniel Jones had a broken bone in his leg in the Week 13 game against the Texans, and there was the point after the touchdown fiasco, but to me, if you are as good of an offense as you think you are internally, then I would suggest to score more than 20 points in 3 of your last 4 games, which they failed to be able to do so, and out of their last 4 games, their only win is against the Atlanta Falcons, who will finish with a top 10 pick in the 2026 draft, and that pick is going to the Rams, but you get the point. It's a bottom 10 team in the NFL, and that's the only team the Colts have been able to beat out of their last 4 games. Also, yes, the obligatory mention of the Minnesota Vikings, because that was an absolute disaster in Seattle in Week 13, and there will be a video on the Minnesota Vikings later this week, which will be released on Saturday morning at 10 a.m., but that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. Please like the video and subscribe if you did, as a football will appear, and is also very much appreciated, and we are closing in on 225,000 subscribers. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.